So hi everyone. This is Shruti Rajgarya, and I'm a faculty at Lawpreneurz, and I think it's an amazing platform that Ronak and his team have come up with. I think it's the need of the hour where it's not always possible to be physically present. Uh, uh, to be physically there to attend series. So to make notes and to make videos available online for students who are studying law across India. I think that's very, very, very remarkable. Um, Today, we're going to be talking about human rights and specifically talking about the concepts of development and the concept of environment that comes into this whole setting. I want to begin this webinar by first talking about giving you a little bit of a background about what human rights is, how did the concept sort of develop over the years, what are the various types of human rights that we see in the world today, what are the special features about human rights that is essential for us to know. Um, and then we go ahead and we sort of delve more into the right to development and the right to environment. Also, along the way, I want to clear certain misconceptions that exist about human rights. So let's try and be a part of this series with a bit of a clean slate. And let's try and have some fun. Yeah. Okay, so when we talk about the concept of human rights, the definition is in the word itself, right? It says human and rights. So when we talk about humans, we talk about somebody who is an individual, somebody who is a person, because of being a person, because of being an individual, he's enjoying certain rights, certain enjoyments, certain things that he's entitled to do. The word entitled is important when we talk about the concept of human rights. It's also rights which just exist with you because you're a human being. Yeah. And when we talk about the concept of rights, it's very important to know that rights and duties are two sides of the same coin. If you have a right, then you have a corresponding duty. And if you have a duty, then you have a corresponding right. So you can't have rights without duties and duties without the concept of rights. So if I'm to say that I have a right to do something, then I also have a corresponding duty to ensure that somebody else has the right to enjoy that particular right as well. It's my duty to protect the person's sort of right to enjoy the particular thing. So it's not only my right, but it's also the right of another individual to do the same. So that's what we're going to try and sort of break down further. A lot of times, the concept of human rights is referred to as the common language of humanity. What do we mean by the common language of humanity? When we say common language of humanity, we say that it is the concept of human rights is very intricately interwoven with the concept of human dignity. Yeah, human dignity is the dignity, the respect that we hold because we are an individual, because we have the right to exist as a human being, and these are rights that enable us to exist as a sort of a human being. So that's what we mean by when we say that it is a common language of humanity. It's humanity to give the to make sure that human rights is enjoyed by the common person, right? It's not something special. It's something that is almost your birthright. When you're born as a human being in this world, human rights comes along with it. It's not something that you need to ask for. That's not what it should be like. Yes, in the world we live in today, it does seem like it's something that we need to earn, but it's not. It's just something that we are given by virtue of the fact that we are a human being. Yeah. Okay. Um, So going ahead, it's a very interesting thing which was said by Justice J.S. Verma, who was the former Chief Justice of India, where he said human dignity is the quintessence of human rights. All those rights which are essential for the protection and the maintenance of human dignity can be called as human rights. Also, the World Conference, which was held in the year 1993 on human rights, um, also stated in its Vienna Declaration that all human rights derive from the dignity inherent in the human person, and that the human person is the center of human rights and fundamental freedoms. It's very, very important that we keep the individual in the center. The fact that you are an individual, the fact that you're born to be a part of this world, by itself gives you a right to enjoy these human rights. Yes. Okay. um Now, one other thing that comes to mind when we talk about the concept of human rights is its protection. That's one of the most important facets of human rights that we need to understand. It's not only understanding what human rights is, but it's also understanding how it's going to be protected, how it's going to be enforced. That is where the real crux comes into the picture. So, it's very important for us to say that an individual's human rights can no longer be completely entrusted in the state. You need to have various organizations besides the state that also enforce the protection and the enforcement of human rights. That's why you have the United Nations at the highest level doing that. So when we talk about human rights, we not only talk about the existence of human rights, but we also, it's very important for us to talk about the enforcement of human rights. That's very, very important for us to keep in mind. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights marks an important milestone for all people over the world because it founded three main principles to do with human rights. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is what is a very solid document, is a very solid structure that we all refer back to when we want to understand more about the set standards of human rights. And they've given us three very important key principles about the concept of human rights. First is that human rights are inalienable. This is to say that they cannot be taken away from you, right? You're born with them and you die with them. No one can take them away from you in the middle. So that's one. Second, human rights are indivisible. Indivisible means it's not given to you in bits and pieces. I can't say that if there are 10 human rights that exist, I'm going to be giving you access to only 5. You can't get the other 5. I can't give you some and I can't deny some to you. It has to be given to you as a whole. Human rights has to be, it's a concept, it's a structure, it's a body, it's a reason for existence that needs to be given to you as a whole. It is indivisible in its existence. And the last one is human rights are interdependent. They're all a part of one large framework of rights that work together. It's not like they operate individually. They all exist together so that human beings can live a free, a safe, and a productive life. As we move further into this webinar, we're going to be talking about how democracy, development, and human rights are uh, intertwined, and how is it that they work together. That's when the concept of interdependency would come. And I want you all to just keep in mind this specific thing that we're going to be talking about. Interdependency is something that in a democratic society, you can't exist on your own. You can't exist and function on your own. There has to be interdependency for everyone to live harmoniously in society. Like when we spoke about rights and duties, if you just had a right without having a corresponding duty for something, you could exist on your own.
But the fact that rights and duties are given to you together, that rights and duties are two sides of the same coin, that rights and duties, if given, are given to you as a as a package, that by itself means that there is an interdependency that exists. There is an interdependency that is always going to be there. Yeah. So the three key principles that are given to us by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is that the first one is that human rights are inalienable, which means that they cannot be taken away from you. You're born with them, you live with them, you die with them. They can't be taken away from you. Second, human rights are indivisible. That means that I can't choose and pick what human rights I decide to give you and what human rights I decide not to give you. I have to give you human rights as a whole. They're indivisible. They can't be divided. I can't give you some and deny you some. If I deny you some human rights, it's going to be a violation of human rights for you. And the last one is that human rights are interdependent. That means that they're a part of a very large framework or a structure where every human being works together. They're all interdependent. They don't work individually, but they work together. And this is to ensure that every human being can live in society freely, safely, and productively. That's very, very essential for us to understand. Yeah.
Okay. Now, moving ahead, I want to begin with talking about a brief history of the concept of human rights. When we speak about human rights or universal human rights, they have a particular history. Yeah. Prior to the second half of the 17th century, the idea that all human beings, simply because they are human, they have certain rights, received no political backing. So when it didn't receive any political backing or any political endorsement, it means it didn't exist. We just existed in society, and we did as we pleased, and we followed maybe certain rules, sure, but they weren't. It wasn't a very said or a very apparent thing that just because I'm a human being, I'm entitled to certain rights. It may have been existed, we don't know. It may have been existed, but it definitely didn't get any political endorsement. And it was only sure in countries like the UK, in the US, in France, in the late 17th and 18th century, there were certain sort of political revolutions which were taking place. So this concept maybe did sort of start coming in, but we're talking about a very different part of the world. We're talking about Britain, we're talking about the United States, we're talking about France, where political revolutions had already started, where political revolutions was already a very big thing, right? And the concept of universal human rights is essentially a product of the 20th century. It only came in the 20th century, and more so the late 20th century. It's a creation of more of the late 20th century. For example, if I'm to give you an example of this, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that we just spoke about, that gave us the three key principles of human rights, ignored the concept of colonialism, which involved a brutal and a systematic denial of human rights in African countries, in many Asian countries, and in a large number of Latin American structures or societies. So the Universal Declaration of Human Rights also did not recognize the concept of colonialism, which is where a large number of African, Asian, and Latin American countries were entangled, involved. And it was only in the late 20th century that this became such a sort of a massive thing. Yeah. As I was a student of human rights and conducted various researches and was working on a few research papers, I came across a very, very interesting fact which we may or may not believe in the world we live in today. A lot of human right professors and human rights teachers believe that the idea of human rights developed very, very early on in China, almost 2000 years ago. So it does have roots. it's amazing, right? I don't think anyone would think that it would have roots in China, but it did. It did have roots in China 2000 years ago. It's a belief. It's certain researchers that say that, believe so, but there is no actual, if you look at the Chinese sort of political theory or the Chinese law or the Chinese practice that existed, prior to the 20th century, it doesn't support that human rights had first, established itself, or had first shown its, had first been in the existence in China 2000 years ago. But there are various theories like this that do emerge, that it existed in a specific country, or it grew in a specific country. But I think more importantly, I think it's important to understand what it turned out to be, what it sort of developed. That's why going into a very deep history of human rights would not be as beneficial as just trying to understand what is it that human rights meant when it started off in the early and as we move towards the end of the 20th century, and what is it that it means to us now. What place does it hold in the national structures of every country? What place does it hold at the international platform? And what place does it hold in a society which is made up of individuals who have started to believe that rights are available to them, because they are human, just because they are human. Yeah. Okay. So far we've tried to cover the concept of human rights. We've spoken about the three key principles that talk about human rights. So we've spoken about the fact that human rights is interdependent. We've said that human rights is inalienable. We have said that human rights is indivisible. This is what a basic structure or a foundation that we've created to build on. We've said that human rights is very closely related to human sort of dignity. It is the rights that an individual enjoys so that he can build his sort of dignity, he can further his sort of dignity, and rights which he's just entitled to because he's a human being. Yes, because he's an individual, it's his birthright. It's very closely related to fundamental rights, fundamental freedoms. We've said that human rights and human duties are blended together. They're two sides of the same coin. If you have a right, you have a duty. And if you have a duty, then you have a corresponding right. Yes? Okay. Now, moving ahead. I want to talk about how rights work. Yeah? The term rights, I'm sure we all know what it means, but let me break down the word for you a little bit and tell you the two ways in which this word can be perceived. If we need to put it in a phrase, how is it that it's going to be perceived? So the first one is, rights can be either being right, where I say that you're right in your opinion or in your thought or in your statement. You're right, being right. The second one is having a right. The word right is similarly used in both phrases, but it does have very different meanings. Being right, it means that you are right, you are correct, you are right to say this, right? The information, supposing I give you a piece of information and that information is correct, or that information is apt, or that information has hit the bullseye, you'll be like, oh, you're being right about this, right? Or if I'm required to do something and I've done it in the right manner or in the right fashion or in the right order, then you'd be like, oh, you were being right by doing this. But the right that we talk about from a legal perspective is having a right, having an entitlement to do something. I have the right to do this. So when we talk about having a right to do something, we say that I have a right to do this. I also have a duty to protect somebody else's right to do this. I'm entitled to do this. Don't we say that a lot of times? It's a word we use so casually, but it has a very deep meaning to it. Entitlement and the concept of right. So when we say that I am being right in doing something or in saying something, we are referring to something called as a rectitude. And when we talk about having a right to do something, where I have a right, where I'm entitled to something, it's called as an entitlement. That means that I have been given a right to do that. I have been given the authority to do that. I have been given the space to do that. Yeah. So that's rectitude and entitlement. Yes. Okay. So when we talk about rectitude, when we talk about entitlement, when we talk about entitlement primarily, it's very different from rectitude. Rectitude is, I'm just saying you're right, right? You have the right to do something, whereas you are right in doing something. They both mean this, they both use the same word, right? But they don't necessarily mean the same thing. But when we talk about entitlement, we're talking about a few players in this. If you say that I have the right to do something, then there's me, because as a human being, you're saying that I'm entitled to do something. If you're asking me that, or if you're telling me that I have the right to do it, that means that you're giving me the freedom to do it. That means you're protecting my right to do it. So then that's you who's exercising their duty for something that I'm doing, right? And then there's that very right that exists. What's that right that you're exercising? What is that particular function that you're doing that's allowing you to, that's allowing me to exercise my right and you to perform your sort of duty? So that there'll be three main things in this. One is the person who's exercising the right. The second is the person who's performing the duty to protect the other person's right to exercise. And second is that right itself that we're all exercising as human beings, that actually exists. Okay. Now, when we talk about the concept of rights, it's incomplete if we don't talk about a few things. When we think about words like exercising, respecting, enjoying, and enforcing, they're all related to the concept of rights. Just a whole broad understanding of the concept of rights. So I'll say it again: exercising, respecting, enjoying, and enforcing. So, claiming a right makes things happen. When I claim that I have a right, that's when all of these factors, all of these terms that we discussed, all of these terms that we spoke about, they come into the picture. They fall into line for us the minute we claim something. We claim that we have a right to do something. We claim that we have a right towards something. We claim that we have a right on something. That's when the enjoyment and the respecting and the enforcement comes into the picture. Let's break it down into part by part. When we talk about exercising a right, that's step number one, where I have said I have claimed the right and now I have the right to exercise it. I have the right to use it, right? That's one. Second is respecting. There's a very famous quote by Voltaire that said, who said that I may not agree with what you say, but I will defend to death your right to say it. It's a very, it's a beautifully put sentence that basically means that I will respect what you have to say. Similarly, when we talk about human rights or we talk about rights as a whole, it's very important to understand that it needs to be respected. I need to respect your right, and you need to respect my right. That's where the concept of respect comes. So that's number two. Number three is enjoying the right. Once you've claimed the right, you've claimed the right to exercise it. You've expected that people or the society around you would respect that right. We move to enjoying the right. A right is always something that you can enjoy, that you can put forth, right? Something that you're going to derive something from. Like when we talk about civil rights or political rights or cultural rights or educational rights, they all give us a right to something. Like your right to vote, that's a political right, right? which allows you to vote. There's something you're getting out of it. That's the enjoyment part. And then the last one is enforcing those rights. Those rights need to be enforced to be made available to you. They need to exist to be able to be made available to you. So, exercising the rights, respecting the rights, enjoying the rights, and enforcing the rights are all structures that begin to exist once you've claimed a specific right. Okay. um, so that's that. Then when we consider or when we talk about how rights work, how is it that we talk about it? So for instance, if I'm to walk into a supermarket and buy a loaf of bread, it would be odd to say that I have the right to my money and which I am exchanging for the right to bread. Are you going to say that? Of course, we already know, we all know that we have the right to our money. We have the right to go to the supermarket. We have the right to exchange money for the commodity or the product. Are we going to go out and say it out loud? Is that how rights work? Is that how rights comes into the picture? No. Rights only comes into a picture when, if in the supermarket situation that I gave you, only in unusual circumstances would we say that those who refrained from stealing my money or bread were respecting my rights. Rights are actually put into use only when there is something wrong, when I'm not allowed to exercise, enjoy, or enforce my right. If I'm unable to do that under those circumstances, there has to be something wrong for rights to be spoken about. Will you talk about rights if everything is fine? Will you talk about rights if everything is free flowing, peaceful, if you're allowed to exercise your rights, you're enjoying your rights? No. It only comes into the picture when there is an issue in terms of your rights are being questioned, your rights are being denied, your rights are being threatened. These are the circumstances under which the concept of rights would come into the picture. The concept of how rights work, why they're given to you, how are they given to you, how are you allowed to use them, how are you allowed to enforce them, enjoy them, exercise them, comes into the picture. They have to be either questioned or threatened or denied. There has to be an issue that is created around those rights for you to have access to them. That's very, very essential to understand. Yeah. Okay. Now there are three major forms of social interaction which is involved when we talk about the concept of rights. First is an assertive exercise. The right is exercised, activating the obligations of the duty bearer, who then either respects the right or violates the right. So, the first example I gave you, where you tell me that, hey, you have the right to do this, and I'm going to protect your right to enjoy this or to exercise it. So, you as a duty bearer, so I am the person who has the right, and you are the duty bearer who either has the right to who either respects my right or who violates my right. If you violate my right, then of course you're either questioning it or you're threatening it or you're denying it. And that's where the concept of rights will come into the picture, right? So that's one. Those are called as, that's an assertive exercise. The second exercise is active respect. The duty bearer takes the right into account in determining how to behave without the right holder ever claiming it. The right has been respected and enjoyed even though it hasn't been actively exercised. Like, for instance, I entered into a supermarket. I know that I have the right to my money. I know that I have the right to exchange my money for a product or a commodity. I don't need to go to the supermarket or to the mall and announce that. I'm going to go in, I'm going to use my money, I'm going to exchange it for a commodity or a product in the supermarket without any hindrance, without being questioned, without being sort of threatened, and I'm going to walk out of there. That is called as active respect, where people around me who are the duty bearers, who are people who are protecting my right to this enjoyment in the supermarket, are not doing anything. They have chosen to respect that right and they've decided to let me be. So I haven't gone ahead and claimed my right to go to the supermarket. I've just gone in, I've enjoyed, I've exercised that right, and I've left. There hasn't been any claiming. That is called as active respect. That's number two. Number 3, objective enjoyment. Rights apparently never enter the transaction, as in the example of buying a loaf of bread that we spoke about. Neither the right holder nor the duty bearer gives them any thought. The right, or at least the object of the right, has been enjoyed. Ordinarily, though, we would not say that it has been respected and neither exercised or enforced in any way whatsoever. So, when neither the duty bearer and nor the person exercising the right gives it a thought, it's a very natural, subconscious thing you do. That's why we said when we talk about human rights, it's your birthright. It's not something that should be thought about. It's not something that requires an active thinking or an active imagination for that matter, or an active existence for that matter. It's just something that you do as a part of your natural life. Ordinarily, you would do it. Naturally, you would do it. I would protect your right, you would protect mine, and we would both just enjoy the fact that we're able to exercise our rights without actually thinking about it. That's called as objective enjoyment. Yeah. So we have rights, which are 3 social types of interactions when we talk about it. I'm just going to do a quick brief of what I just did, a quick sort of a recap. Assertive exercise, where the duty bearer consciously makes an effort to either respect you enjoying your right, or violates or threatens or questions or denies the fact that you have the right to enjoy the right. That's one. Second, active respect. The duty bearer takes the right into consideration, and without the person who has the right actually claiming the right, just goes ahead and protects the person's right to enjoy it without the person having the right actually claiming it. Okay. And the last one is objective enjoyment, where neither the person exercising the right nor the duty bearer who's protecting the right gives it a thought. It's a very natural process that occurs. It's very, very natural, as if something is just very natural. It's existing. It's my birthright. It's like going into a supermarket, right? I've gone into a supermarket. I've bought a loaf of bread. The person at the cashier has given me the change, has exchanged the money for the product and given it to me. And I've gone my way. The person at the cashier is the duty bearer. I am the person exercising my right. We've both done our sort of parts, and we've both gone our ways without any fuss created, without any claiming or exercising of any right or duty being taken place. It's all happened very, very smoothly. So that's when we talk about the broad picture about the concept of rights. Yeah. Okay. Now, just give me a second. Okay. Now it's important for us to understand what certain special features of human rights exist. We've spoken about human rights being our birthright because we are a human being. We've spoken about them being inalienable, interdependent, and indivisible. We've spoken about that structure. It's also very important for us to understand what human rights actually are. What is it that makes it so special? Why is it that it's considered to be ordinary and natural, but also a sort of special status is given to it? It's very important to understand that, and that's what we're going to be doing now. Human rights are equal rights. It's very, very important to understand that they're equal. What do I mean by equal? One either is or is not a human being, and therefore the same human rights is given to all or to none for that matter. So you're either a human being or you are not. If you are a human being, then the same rights would be given to you, or none of the rights would be given to you. That's what we mean when we say that human rights are equal. Okay, that's number one. That's the first special feature we did. The second one is that human rights are universal rights. What do I mean by universal rights? That today we consider all members of species as Homo sapiens, that is human beings. So it's universal because if you are a human being, if you are a Homo sapien or a human being, then you are entitled to these human rights. Back to um, it takes us back to what we spoke about when we said that human rights are interdependent, that human rights are inalienable, that human rights are indivisible, that human rights are universal. Remember, I mentioned that everything, when we say that they are interdependent, we say that they are a part of one large framework, they're a part of one large structure, and they exist no matter what together to give you a safe, a free and a productive life and existence in society. So when we talk about the special features of human rights, we say that they're equal, we say that they are interdependent, we say that they are inalienable, we say that they are universal. It's very important to know because, okay, let's take a step back and let's talk about why is it that human rights, why is it important for us to know these things about human rights? Is it enough for us to know that, is it enough for us to know the definition? Is it enough for us to understand the concept? And if that is enough, then why is it that we need to understand what human rights is? Human rights comes into the picture when there is a denial, when there is a violation of these rights. That's when human rights comes into the picture. And in order to know whether they've been enforced or not, you need to know the very characteristics, the very existence, the very uh, the very existence, the very base, the very foundation of human rights. It's very important to understand that. If we don't know what we mean by human rights being universal or being inalienable or being interdependent, we are never going to be able to understand whether what happens or what needs to be done when human rights are violated. And by violation, I mean they're either denied to you, they're either questioned, or they're just not given to you in the first place. Yeah. So when we talk about special features, we talk about human rights being inalienable, human rights being equal, human rights being interdependent, and human rights being universal. It's very important to understand that human rights is very closely linked and very closely interwoven with the concept of human dignity. If there is human dignity, there is human rights. If there is human rights, there has to be human dignity. The concept, both of these concepts have to exist together. Yeah. Okay. Now, moving ahead, when we talk about human rights, a lot of people use human rights as a synonym for the concept of moral rights, right? Human rights do have a legal applicability, a legal framework, a sort of a political, sort of a what what word can we use? A political legitimacy of its own. What do I mean when I say that? Human rights traditionally are thought of as moral rights of the highest order. They have also become international legal rights. We have this concept of international human rights. That's also something that is a very crucial part, and maybe we can cover that in another webinar on human rights if you guys are interested. But human rights is considered as moral rights of the highest order. And it is also something that is expanded at the national as well as the international level in the world we live in today. The object of many human rights can be claimed as ordinary legal rights in most national legal systems. So, human rights is generally interwoven in the already existing sort of legal rights which are given to the citizens of a particular country. Like, for instance, a lot of our human rights is already existing in the fundamental rights of our Indian Constitution. Many local jurisdictions also have human rights statutes. Of course, we have human rights for special protection. Armed with multiple claims, right holders typically use the lowest right available. Whatever can give you remedy, whatever can give you a solution on the spot, that's the first thing that you want. Let's take an example. In the United States, as in most of the countries in the world, protection against racial discrimination in employment is available on several grounds. There is a protection that if you are not given a job because of your racial status, then there will be a protection in place because this right has been violated. Depending on one's employment agreement, a grievance may be all that is required, or a legal action based on that particular contract. No one would specifically say human rights. We just know that a right was given to us. We had a right under a specific contract, an employment contract, and that right was violated. So generally, most companies and corporations have they have a grievance cell, and you have a legal action that is taken if it is required to be taken at that point in time. Now, if that fails, for instance, if that grievance committee fails you, or if that grievance committee fails from taking an action on that particular thing for you, one may be able to bring a suit under a local ordinance or a state non-discrimination statute. You may go to a particular act and file a case under a particular structure. That's the second step that's available to you when we talk about the violation of ordinary legal rights. Federal statutes and the Constitution may offer remedies at still a higher level. So that's still an option that is available to you if the first two don't provide you with any sort of solution or any solace or any form of remedy. In unusual cases, one may be forced to resort to international human rights claims. We do have in Europe, we have the European Court of Human Rights, which provides as an intermediate stage between the national and the international level. Right? A lot of you must have heard of Amal Clooney. She's George Clooney's wife. She's a very reputed human rights lawyer. She's also somebody that you can look up. Her cases are a very strong sort of a landmark or an understanding of the way the concept of human rights works at the international level, how they take national level cases and give it international sort of recognition. She's one of the most sought out lawyers for that. That's somebody you can look up. And in addition to all of that, a victim of discrimination may claim moral rather than legal rights, as well as appeal to non-rights based considerations of justice and righteousness. When we talk about human rights, we're not only talking about a legal facet. The legal facet is very, very important because you need the law on your side, you need the court system to protect you and to uphold your right. But there is also a concept of right and wrong that exists. There's also a concept of moral righteousness that exists. There's also a concept of morality that exists. That's where the concept of human dignity comes into the picture. That's where they're all interwoven together. It goes back to what I said in the beginning of my session, that the human rights is all interwoven. They're all intermingled, they're interwoven, they exist together, they're interdependent of each other. So there is a legal side, yes, but there's also a moral side. That's why we say that human rights is often regarded as moral rights which are enforced at the highest level, at the top level. Yeah? Okay. Right. Now let's go to the various types of rights that exist, the various types of human rights that exist. Human rights is broadly divided into civil and political rights, which is one chunk, and then you have your economic, your social, and your cultural rights on the other side. Now, what do we mean when we talk about the word civil and political rights? One thing that I've understood all throughout law school and all throughout working in the legal sector is that the answer is most often in the word itself. When we spoke about human rights, I broke it down for you and I said human and rights. And we got the answer. We derived the meaning from this word, from this phrase itself. Similarly, when we talk about civil and political rights, think of the layman sort of definition of civil rights and the layman definition of the concept of political rights, and you will arrive at the answer very easily. So let's do this together. Civil means that which involves protection of life and personal liberty. Two very important phrases in the legal field, especially when we talk about the Indian Constitution: protection of life and personal liberty. Civil rights is what gives you a dignified life. It is what brings the dignity into the concept of human rights. This would include your right to life, your right to liberty, your right to security, your right to privacy, your right to the freedom of movement, your freedom of thought, conscience, religion. That's what civil rights mean. Rights that give you the right to lead a dignified life. So your right to life, your right to movement, your right to thought, your right to religion, conscience, liberty, security are all civil rights. Then we come to the concept of political rights. Political rights is the rights which allow an individual to participate either directly or indirectly in the political activities of their state, their country, their sort of nation and the world. The word political tells us that when we talk about politics, we talk about the government. When we talk about political, we're generally talking about the government, right? So this would generally mean your right to be elected, your right to vote, your right to take part in public affairs, everything that directly or indirectly permits you to participate in the activities of the state, of the government, of the nation is all comes under the broad spectrum of the concept of political rights. So that's one chunk. Civil and political rights go hand in hand. Civil rights allow you to live your life in a dignified manner, whereas political rights allow you to directly or indirectly participate in the activities and affairs of the state, which is the right to vote, the right to be elected, the right to participate in public affairs, and so on. Very commonly, civil and political rights are referred to as negative rights. I just want you to hold on to this thought while I go on to the other chunk, explain that, and then I'll come on to explain to you why these two chunks are divided into positive and into negative. The second part is economic, social, and cultural rights. What do we mean by economic, social, and cultural rights? Again, look at the word, think of the layman definition of the word, and you'll be able to arrive at the answer. Economic, social, and cultural rights is what gives you the basic necessities of life. These are rights that allow you to lead your life like any other human being would. Basic things that you need to lead your life. For instance, social equality. When we spoke about civil and we spoke about political rights, we spoke about human dignity. We spoke about the concept of human dignity. When we talk about economic, social, and cultural rights, we're talking about the concept of social equality. In society, what is it that you need to exist freely, productively, and safely? The right to food, the right to clothing, the right to housing, the right to work. All of that is referred to as economic, social, and cultural rights. If you've done the Constitution of India, you know which ones we're referring to. We're talking about Article 19, Article 21, Article 22, 23, 24. We're talking about all of these rights which fall under the brackets of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. Now, economic, social, and cultural rights are referred to as positive rights. And remember, I told you that civil and political rights are referred to as negative rights. Now, let's think about why it's so. Civil and political rights are often referred to as negative rights because it is the duty of the state to abstain from doing anything that would violate or restrict these rights. So they're not given to you as if you're allowed to do this, but they're framed in such a way that they tell you that a state cannot do certain things, A, B, C, D, E, F, so that you can enjoy these Right. So the first step of giving you these rights is negative. It's abstaining from doing something. The state needs to abstain from doing something in order to make sure that you enjoy your rights as a whole. Why are economic, social, and cultural rights referred to as positive rights? They're referred to as positive rights because they require active intervention from the state. There is no abstention from the state. There is no merely the state holding back from doing certain things, but it's the state actively taking part in order to ensure that certain rights are enjoyed by you. Like, for instance, when we say, uh, right to housing, right? So certain housing facilities, certain housing schemes have to be given to you by the state. When we say the right to food or the right to work, the right to employment opportunities, it is the responsibility of the state to create it for you. So creation means it's a positive step, it's a step forward. Whereas abstaining or preventing or sustain or just abstaining from something would mean a negative thing because you're preventing yourself from doing something. So civil and political rights are often referred to as negative sort of rights, and economic, social, and cultural rights are often referred to as positive rights. Yeah. Okay. Now, moving further into understanding the concept of human rights stronger, um, have you ever thought of what the sources of these human rights could be? Yes, we've gone ahead and said that human rights are because of the customs that exist. Human rights are because of the fact that we are a human being. Human rights is because we are born as human beings. They're required to uphold our sort of dignity. They're there to uphold our existence. But what is it that is the various sources of human rights? So human rights is basically based on various treaties which are signed at the international level, primarily involving the UN. They are also very closely determined by the customs, the laws, the general principles that exist in a nation, within the national boundaries of a particular country. Like, for instance, if I'm to give you an example, a few years ago, um, the right to drive, right? The right for a woman to drive is, in a lot of countries, not looked at as a human right. Like in the United States or the UK or even in India. In India, also, women drive. Is it a special case? Is it a special right that we give them? No. It's just something that they do in their ordinary sort of lives. But in various Islamic countries, in various Middle Eastern countries, it's not looked upon as something that's very readily, given. So a few years ago, one of these Middle Eastern countries went ahead and declared that a right for every woman to drive would be a right that would be given to them. They wouldn't need a male to accompany them. They wouldn't need to get their permission of their fathers, their husbands or their sons to sort of drive. So it depends on the custom, the culture, the general principles, the laws. A lot of human rights exist or are derived from those. So they're derived from treaties, they're derived from customs, laws, general principles that exist within the national boundaries of countries. They're also based on various resolutions which are passed by the UN General Assembly. The UN General Assembly has a very strong role to play in this. Human rights is also often a product of judicial sort of decisions and writings which are given by eminent jurists in the legal systems around the world. Okay, that's important to know, and it's important to understand what their sources are, what their sort of roots are. Yeah. Okay. Now, one last part before we actually move on to the right to development and the right to environment, which you will understand much better now that we have a background of the special features, the characteristics, the past, the history of human rights. I wanted to talk about what does human rights mean in a Hindu South Asian society? What is it that it means to us? We've grown in a structure like India, which is a developing country, which is doing extremely well for itself. And how is it, from all its cosmology, its social philosophy, its caste system, um, it's the priority of the various castes that we have, the Hinduism that exists in our structure? How is it that we've emerged? How is it that uh, human rights has evolved? How have all of these structures existed? So I'm just going to be going ahead and giving you a bit of a brief. We won't go into too much detail, but I will share some sources where you can read more about this once the uh, webinar is over. So the Hindu society or the Hindu theory is based on four goals, right? Four ends or goals or interests, which are the concept of dharma, the concept of artha, the concept of kama, and the concept of moksha. I'm sure you've heard this. If you don't know it in detail, but I'm sure you've heard that the concept of dharma, karma, kama, moksha all exist. The most important of all of these is the concept of dharma. Dharma it refers to ethical, sort of ethical life. It refers to duty. It's your dharma. It's your dharma to do this. It's your dharma to ensure that life happens in a certain way. So it refers to duty. The second is artha. Artha is the concept of polity. Artha refers more directly to political and economic domain, identifying the pursuit of worldly goods as the second principle. It's the bodily desire. That's what kama means. The third one is kama. Kama refers to bodily desire, and the last one is moksha, which is a liberation from all the worldly existence. So you have that your actions is what determines your life ahead. Primarily, this is what Hinduism is based on. This is what these four goals, which is dharma, kama, artha, and moksha, ultimately mean. If you do good deeds, good things will happen to you. You will not have to pay for them. If you don't do good deeds, good things are not going to happen to you. That's what the Hindu system, the social philosophy is. The social philosophy is what exists, right? And then, from all of these social obligations, from all of these cosmologies, from all of these social philosophies, we came up with the caste system that exists. We have the Brahmins, which is the priestly caste, the educated class, the cream part of society that we say now. Then we have the Kshatriyas, which is the warrior class or the ruler class, the ones who fight for us and keep us protected, keep us protected from internal enemies as well as external enemies. The third one is the Vaishya class or the merchant class, the goldsmiths, the lawyers, the teachers, the middle class basically. Then we have the Shudra class, which is your servants, your helpers, your haircuts, your shoe polishes. All of these fall under this category. And then beneath this formal class system is the Chandalas or the untouchables or the outcasts. Now these are primarily the ones which are subjected to human rights. There are various articles written by Indian authors as well as foreign authors that throw light on this, that tell you that it's not the right thing to do, that tell you that they're human beings, they have the right as well. But we have the various structures that we come from, that the Hindu society believes in, that the Indian society believes in, that says that, okay, you have the Brahmins, the Kshatriyas, the Vaishyas, the Shudras, and then the Chandalas. And it's because of their karmas or because of their deeds of their previous lives that they're leading a certain type of life. So you have people whose thinking is very deep rooted in social philosophies, in social backwardness, if we may call it, but it's still very prevalent in India. It's a philosophy, it's a belief, it's a structure that people still feel very, very strongly about. It's still something that people base their actions on. It's still something that they don't want to understand, that rights is given to you because you're a human being. You are entitled to clean water. You are entitled to safe water. You are entitled to a clean environment. They don't understand that. For them, it's still the social philosophy, the social cosmology that comes into the picture, which is governed by the four main principles of dharma, artha, kama, and moksha. So even though as a society we have progressed, education has taken us ahead, but we do have to understand that a very large part of our society still believes in this. Human rights is still not very inalienably or as a whole, without being divided, still being given to you or given access to you. There's an incredible book called The Universal Human Rights in Theory and Practice by Jack Donnelly that speaks about this. There's an entire chapter on it. Let me go ahead and give you that chapter as well. It's called Humans and Society in Hindu South Asia. It talks about the cosmology, the caste system, the social philosophy, the opposition to caste discrimination. It's beautifully been explained by this author, and I highly recommend, if you're interested in knowing more, then you should definitely refer to this book. Yeah. Okay. So now, having taken you through and given you a very strong hold, a very strong understanding of human rights, its history, its sources, its special features, its various types, let's go on to two very interesting concepts that I wanted to cover in this webinar, and that is the right to a healthy environment and the right to development. Yeah, I'm going to try and link the concept of democracy, development, and human rights all together. And let's try and see if we can make some sense out of it. Yeah. So right to environment, right to a healthy environment is fairly very self-explanatory and an easy one. But the reason I want to talk about it is because it does seem easy. It does seem self-explanatory. It does seem something that's very normal. That's something that doesn't need a lot of thinking. But it's still something that's not very easily available to us. And let's see how. So when we talk about an environment from an from an angle of human rights, we're talking about two angles that sort of exist here. First is the right to a healthy environment itself as a human right. Of course, you have, because if you don't live in a clean environment, your health is going to get affected. If your health is going to get affected, your job's going to get affected, your family is going to get affected. You're not going to be able to function as a normal human being safely, productively, and freely in society. So that's one. Thus, which is very, this, by the way, this right to calling the right to a healthy environment as existing as a human right in itself is very is found in the American Convention of Human Rights. That's where it was first found. Then we go on to human rights related to the environment can be derived from other human rights, like the right to life, the right to health. So the first one can be broken down into the second one. If we don't treat the right to a healthy environment as a human right in itself, we're hampering our right to life. We're hampering our right to family. We're hampering our right to health, and all of that gets hampered if human rights is not referred to as if the right to a healthy environment is not referred to as a human right. Okay. In India, it's a matter of great pride for us that judicial activism on the part of the court system has furthered the concept of human rights in the environment sector. And let's see how that's done. Now, we've passed the Environment Protection Act. We've passed the Water Act of 1974. We've passed the Air Act of 1981. We've passed the Noise Pollution Act, the Noise Pollution Rules of 2000. We've passed the Indian Forest Act of 1927, the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972, and the Forest Conservation Act of 1980. All of these acts have been passed in order to further the concept of ordinary legal rights, which we then form a niche, and in particularly we call them as human rights, so as to speak. We have section 2A of the Environment Protection Act, which defines environment to include water, air, land, and the interrelationship between water, air, land, and human beings, along with living creatures like plants, microorganisms, and property. So when we talk about the environment, we have to talk about all the elements of environment. We have to talk about all the living creatures who are living in the environment, and how is the relationship between the environmental factors and the existence of these living creatures coming together to give us the concept of human rights. Okay. We have various provisions in our Indian Constitution, which is Article 21, which says that no person shall be deprived of his life or personal liberty except for according to the procedure established by law. So yes, there is no mention of the environment in this article, but they are talking about your right to life. Your right to life includes your right to living in a clean, safe, and secure environment. And it's because of the judicial activism of the courts systems that has given us a pollution free environment, and has given the status of the fundamental right of Article 21 to be pollution free, to have a clean and a safe environment in which we can all live, thrive, and sustain. The 42nd Amendment of the Indian Constitution in the year 1976 added a new dimension to the Indian Constitution by adding Article 51, which is the fundamental duties. And there are 10 fundamental duties, where Clause G of Article 51A specifically deals with the protection of the environment. When we spoke about fundamental rights, I told you that rights and duties are independent. Rights and duties are, interdependent. They're two sides of the same coin. If you have a right, then you have a corresponding duty, and if you have a duty, then you have a corresponding right. So that's where the 42nd Amendment is considered so important, because one of the many reasons is that it introduced the concept of fundamental duties under Article 51A, and specifically gave us a right to a clean and a secure environment, a pollution-free environment. Okay. Then further, when we talk about judicial activism, or we talk about the right to an environment, we can only talk about its success when we talk about its enforceability, right? So there's a very famous judge. He's called the Green Judge. His name is Justice Kuldeep Singh. He is the one who put a lid on the pollution around the Taj Mahal in Agra. He closed various hazardous factories in Delhi. He struck down various dubious leases which were given to spam motels, and by the then Minister of Environment. And the Green Judge broke new grounds on environmental protection and strengthened judicial activism in this field, specifically in India. We also have certain green courts and the National Green Tribunal, which has been set up. There has been a constant plea in India, a constant urge in India to set up green courts that primarily deal with this, because if you're living in a dirty environment, if you're living in a polluted environment, then the quality of your life gets affected. If the quality of life gets affected, then your existence as a human being in society gets affected, your family gets affected, people living around you gets affected. And then how do you live as a human being? How do you live with dignity in society if you're constantly falling sick because of the pollution created in the environment? So we have concepts like the precautionary principle, the polluter pays principle as well. So basically, the environment has a very strong existence, or is very important for us to live with dignity. Would you like to live where you cook? No, you wouldn't, right? Would you like to live where there is a lot of garbage? No, because it goes against your health, it goes against your dignity, it goes against how you live. That's why it's very important for us to live in clean environments and also perform our duties so that others can live in a clean environment. Right to environment is not very explicitly a right to environment, but what we do need to understand is that it is interwoven, which finally 5, 6, 10, 15 human rights come together, and it gives us a broad human rights. And right to environment is a very, very important one. Then we come to the right to development. The right to development is one of the most important human rights, because development as a whole is very important for a democratic structure, is very important for a society, is very important for a community, is very important for individuals living in that community. Let's see how. Now I'm going to try and talk about human rights, democracy, because India is a democratic structure, and the concept of development. I'm going to try and talk about all three of them together. Let me start off by first giving you individual meanings and individual existence of these three terms, of these three phrases, and then let's try and get them together to come up with why the right to development falls, or why is it that we would talk about the right to development when we talk about human rights. Let's try to arrive at it rather than me just giving the answer to you. Yeah. Okay. Now, when we talk about development, we're talking about rapid and sustainable economic growth. Yes, we are talking about growth. We are talking about the betterment of society. We are talking about sustainably growing, improving as individuals, as a community, as a society, as a nation, as a country. Yeah, so that's one. Second is democracy. When we talk about democracy, we're talking about a government by the people, of the people, and for the people. So we are essentially talking about our political rights. Remember, when we spoke about human rights, I said human rights are civil and political. They're also economic, cultural, and educational. So we're talking about the political rights, where you have the right to vote, you have the right to be elected, you have the right to participate in various affairs, in various public affairs of the state. That's what it is when we talk about democracy, where we have certain laws and rules that the state has to follow. We have certain rights that are given to us by the state, we as people, and it is a government where the people need to be given accountability for. It's the government by the people, of the people, and for the people. And then we come to the concept of human rights. What do we mean when we talk about human rights? Which means that the rights we have as citizens, the rights we have as human beings, the rights, the fundamental freedoms and rights that we have because we are a human being, because we are it is to be considered as our birthright, so as to say. Yeah. How is it that we can intervene these three: democracy, development, and human rights? Now, when we talk about interweaving those, we are a democracy, and therefore we have civil and political rights. That's one part where we clubbed human rights and democracy. Because we are a democracy, because we are a government by the people, of the people, and for the people, we are given civil, political, cultural, economic, and educational rights. Right? So that's the first part. The second is, because we are a democracy, we need to develop ourselves. Our economy needs to grow. Our people need to grow. Our society needs to grow. We need to grow with the change in society. We need to develop with the change in society. So development for a democratic structure, or for any structure, no matter what, whether you are a democracy or not, is important. If you are not sort of developed in terms of your laws, if you're not developed in terms of your systems, your structures, your people, then it's going to be hard for you to exist, because then you're going to be outdated, and there's no space for outdated in the world that we live in today, right? Things are changing very quickly. Things are expanding very quickly. Yeah. Okay. Human rights. When we talk about human rights and development, you're not only talking about the development of a system, right? You're not only talking about development of machinery. whose development are you talking about? We're talking about development of people. We're talking about development of the blood and sweat that make our society, that make our systems, that make or break our states, that make or break our governments. We're talking about human beings. So if you give rights to human beings, they are called as human rights. They are rights that are given to them because they are a human being. So that's how we tried to get the concept of rights, the concept of human rights, the concept of development, and the concept of democracy under one. So I think it will be right to say that when we say the right to development, we're talking about self-determination. We're talking about equal opportunities for all without any form of discrimination. We're talking about popular participation in development. We're talking about full sovereignty over natural resources of that country. And we are talking about the creation of favorable conditions for the enjoyment of civil, political, economic, social, and cultural rights. So we spoke about human rights, we spoke about development, and we spoke about democracy when we spoke about the definition of right to life. Now, the Indian Constitution under Article 21 of the Fundamental Rights guarantees the right to life, and the right to development is now accepted as part of this fundamental right. You also have Article 10 of the Vienna Declaration and Program of Action that states that the World Conference of Human Rights affirms the right to development as a universal and inalienable right and an integral part of the fundamental human rights structure. So when we talk about the right to development, we have to talk about the development of a human being, the development of a society, the development of a structure, the development of the state, the development of the laws. Like when we spoke about the caste system, we said the caste system existed in those times, but now the importance of that caste system is still there, but it's becoming weaker. It's not as strong as it used to be because human rights is coming into the picture. International human rights is coming into the picture, and we need to stay up to date with the laws of society. Okay, so this was the right to development, the right to environment. How is it that human rights is indirectly included or interwoven into the concept of human rights? Human rights is a very fast growing aspect of law at the moment. People have different versions of it. People have different analysis, interpretations of it. Different countries look at it from different angles. It's very important to understand it. There are some very interesting books that I would recommend for sources of information on human rights if you're interested. There's this book called the International Human Rights Law and Practice by the Cambridge Publishing House. It's a wonderful book that gives a very interesting insight on international human rights. Then for human rights under international law as well as Indian law, primarily for Indian law, you have this book by Dr. S.K. Kapoor, which is published by the Central Law Agency. It's called Human Rights under International Law and Indian Law, which is another very, very interesting book to just sort of read or skim through. Based on your questions and your responses, let's see if we can try and come up with a session on international human rights for you. This was just a session on human rights, but if you're interested, we can come up with a session on international human rights as well. I hope you enjoyed the session. You can send in your questions or your queries or your comments to the team of Lawpreneurz, and I can take it from there. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed the session. And feel free to get in touch with us in case you want any further clarifications. Thank you very much. Thanks.